Emotions. Emotions are a part of our characters, which focuses primarily on feelings and instead of thought. Emotions have been a critical aspect of our human experience from time immemorial as they have influenced how we interact with both the tangible and intangible aspects of both our bio and social ecosystems. Emotions have influenced things ranging from social, economic, even all the way to the academia. Now, for me as a child growing up in Nigeria, it was a very interesting journey with emotion as each time I tried to express my emotion, I was told a lot of time to, hey, suck it up, be a man. Men don't show emotion. And it wasn't great, although it took me a long time and I imbibed this kind of philosophy and I actually became a man. And funny enough, when I started my journey into exploring product design, a field that focuses a lot on how emotions affect us, not just within ourselves, but how emotions affect our relationship between intangible things, things that are not human, things that we may say have no life in themselves. As such, it was such a funny experience because I didn't know how much my journey in product design had changed my view of life until one day I had a conversation with a teenage girl, and amongst the so many questions she asked me, there was one I was answering, and all of a sudden I had a well of emotions within me, and I started crying. And she was shocked. That was the first time she had ever seen a man cry. We may look at emotions from the sentimental aspect and think of it as, oh, okay, they're just sentimental things that affect us as people. But it's been noted according to the National Association of the Education of Children, or the education of young children, that emotion actually aids child development. Emotional health has been seen to be as important, as equally important as the physical health of a child. As such, emotional health has a significant influence on the development of children. It also has significant influence on the capacity of those children to develop to lead a meaningful life. So how do emotions affect product? Today we're going to consider 3 emotions. There are about 27 different kaleidoscope of emotions that the human experiences. But for the sake of time, we'll consider 3 of them: joy, empathy, and nostalgia. Joy is defined as the feeling of great pleasure and happiness. And one might look at, say, well, how does this affect product? Well, the first thing is, how do we know when people are experiencing joy, this emotion? It's expressed through their facial expressions, through a smile. And interestingly, this graphical expression has become a universal sign. You don't need to learn how to speak Chinese to smile to a Chinese man for him to understand that you're expressing some form of pleasure by interacting with him. As such, this smile has been explored by designers in so many ways. I'll mention some interesting ones. The first one is the emoji. The emoji, which is the most popular one, is a smiley. The smiley is a current virtual emoji, and it started in recent years. And with the introduction of the emoji, we have noticed a considerable improvement in the quality of our chatting, right? For anyone who have chatted today, there's a chance that you used a smiley to express an emotion to the other person at the other end, right? The second thing is, because of how graphical this has been, people have found a way to integrate it in very clever ways. And one of my favorite ones is how it was integrated in the Amazon logo. I love the Amazon logo for two reasons. First, it's a logo. And what's a logo? A logo, it's essentially the face of a brand. And as explained earlier, we know when people are happy because of how their face expresses this emotion with a smile, right? So designers have found clever ways of expressing this emotion using design cues for the face of brands. Now, we'll look at the first part of my interest in the Amazon logo, which is the utilitarian aspect of the Amazon logo. If you look at the Amazon logo, you notice a swoop, right, that goes from the A character on the Amazon logo to the Z character, right? This means that as a consumer, when you come to Amazon, Amazon addresses your needs from A to Z, right? And when we talk about A to Z, in current parlance, that means everything, right? Now, the next thing that I found interesting is that arrow isn't just functioning as an arrow, but it's functioning as a vehicle of emotion, a smile. What it shows you that when you come on the Amazon website, you are going to experience a whole lot of happiness and great pleasure in dealing with the company, right? And with this, you can see this sign on their packages, you can see on their vehicles, on their airplanes, and virtually everything that stands for the company, always reminding the user that, hey, we are here to bring you joy. The second one we're going to talk about, which a speaker also mentioned before I came up, is empathy. Empathy, to a great extent, is our ability to relate with the emotions of a second or third party. And it's such a powerful emotion. I love it a lot because it's the foundation of societies. Before we started gathering into smaller societies and forming communities and forming cities, we were all hunters-gatherers. Everyone was to your tent, right? But for us to come together, we had to have some level of empathy to know that if I'm driving on the road and I take the one way, it will affect someone else, right? So I don't break that law, so that I don't affect someone else negatively. With empathy, most people might think, oh, well, how does that affect products? But I'll share you an interesting story that I love a lot. In the 1970s, during the oil crisis, designers were faced with a huge problem. So over here on the screen, you can see two vehicles. There's one, the red car, which is the Ford Thunderbird, right? It was a vehicle from the 50s and the 60s. That period in automotive design was known as the Baroque era. Why was it known as that? Because it was a period which was a few years after the World War II, and at that point in history, people had most of the European economies had already come out from their Great Depressions, so people had money, and apart from that, fuel was cheap, so you could have humongous cars. You could have cars that had these huge grills, cars that had very huge volumes, and some people call them sculptures on wheels. In fact, cars within the Baroque era of automotive design are most populated in most automotive museums, because at that point it married both art, design, and engineering. Now, interestingly, in the 70s, barely between less than 2 decades after, something happened. Oil prices rose on the international market, and it became evident that if you were meant to drive such vehicles, you were going to spend a lot on fuel. But beyond the oil crisis, another thing also started around the 70s. People became aware of how their actions affect the ecosystem. People were aware of the carbon footprints that their activities bring, their cooking, cars. But out of all this, even though some of the vehicles that cause the greatest amount of carbon footprint are in automobiles, but things like freight ships and the rest, people looked at cars as they're the ones causing this problem. Now, it became a huge problem for the automotive industry. How do we solve this problem? We have two issues on ground. The first problem was quite direct, make cars more fuel efficient, right? And the second thing was, how do you express fuel efficiency just by you looking at a car? Of course, you can't bring your car everywhere and say, hey, my car is fuel efficient, buy it. But you had to find a way using design to make those cars look fuel efficient. So the car on the left side, which is the Ford Fiesta, the first generation Ford Fiesta, it was born from this philosophy. How do we make cars look more innocent, more acceptable? The idea was, okay, let's use plastics instead of the huge chromes that we had with cars in the decades that were preceding that. By using plastics were soft material and were materials that people could easily hook up to, easily warm up to. The next thing was try and use proportions that remind people of things that are cute. So you had these little buggy cars, unlike the cars in the 60s that were huge. You had these tiny cars that reminded people of teddy bears, that reminded people of rabbits. One of the famous cars within this period is the Volkswagen Golf, which other people have nicknamed the rabbit in some climes. With this strategy, the automotive industry was saved. Brilliant. The next one we'll talk about is nostalgia. Nostalgia is that feeling that we have of the good old days. In Nigeria, we say that a lot. Oh, the good old days when the naira was almost equivalent to $1. Those good old days when, as a Nigerian, you could travel virtually everywhere, for instance, UK, without having to give them your entire life history for a visa. Right? But how did emotions affect us in today's world? I'll just bring an instance of a recent social media phenomena, which is a 10-year challenge. I'm sure a lot of people have seen that on social media in recent times. Which 10-year challenge was simply someone posting a picture of 10 years ago and then posting another one, a recent picture. This started out as a joke, and within a few weeks, there were about 40 million posts on this thing. And what was the driving force for that? Nostalgia. The second one I'll talk about is Nokia. Most times when companies try to come back to an industry where they were once dominated, they come back with a flagship product. However, Nokia took a different direction. They came in with an entry-level product. But the entry-level product wasn't just an entry-level product. It was an entry-level product backed up by a huge dose of nostalgia. It was a Nokia 3310. I'm quite sure for most of us growing up in the 90s would have had experience with this product. The Nokia 3310 defined what Nokia stood for. It was rugged, it was durable, it had a long-lasting battery. And there were a lot of jokes about the Nokia 3310. One of my favorites is, my Nokia 3310 fell on the floor, and unfortunately, my tiles broke. Now, what Nokia did with the Nokia 3310 was did a remake of it. And they introduced it in 2017. Prior to the introduction, I could notice that there was just a lot of noise going on. People literally snatched the campaign from Nokia and talked about the product more than the company. At some point, some people could have felt, well, probably these guys are being paid, they're just influencers, right? Wrong. On the day, later in 2017, when the product was released, on the day it was launched, it sold out completely. People were not buying it because they needed something to call. People were buying it for that emotional thing that came with that product. On this background, I decided to do an experiment, right? I'm a designer, so once in a while, at this point I was working with a company where I designed phones and accessories, and I said, well, let me just play around with an actual, not a mobile phone, but a design that expresses this nostalgia. So I went back early in the 20th century and took the form of the classic desk phones we had, and combined it with modern technology, touchscreen technology, combined it with new materials, combined it with new finishes, right? And when I published it out on my website, I was surprised that instantly I started getting mails from top design publications around the world asking me for permission so that they could share this thing. Within a short period of time, I was getting random messages from virtually everywhere for people asking just one question: where do we buy it? You're not buying it for the function. You don't move with this thing. Your mobile phone is more practical than this thing, right? But this has nostalgia, which people wanted to relate with. Those good memories of the good times of old. So what does this mean to us as a nation at this point in time? Back in 2015, we experienced one of our worst recessions in history, and this plunged a lot of people out of jobs, and for people who still had jobs, realized overnight that their salaries were worth less than half of what they had negotiated for. And this showed us that as a nation, we needed to break away from the consumer-centric economy we've been running for years to an economy that produces things from within and can stand on its own. And as such, there was this hashtag that started trending, which was Buy Naija to grow the Naira. And interestingly, there were public figures who stood by this, such as Ben Bruce, who showed that, look, we need to buy what's here, what's growing here, so that we can grow the Naira. But how do you buy Naija when the Naija has not been made? So as we take steps into becoming an industrial, independent nation, we shouldn't just focus on the utilitarian aspect of products. We should also focus on what is equally important, their emotional value. Thank you very much.